Welcome in this new video, a video in which I will discuss my 10 favorite Hong Kong films. Why am I doing this video? It's following a discussion I had with one of the viewers of the channel and who had expressed some criticism, objective and constructive criticism that was not a hater. And so we engaged in a discussion about what could be improved on the channel. And one of the things which he thought was a bit missing sometimes for me was more passion, to have a more clear indication of what I liked and what were my views on some of the films I was talking about. And it's true, I mean, I have to admit that I'm not the most expressive person in the world, that's for sure, and there are some people who are more able to show their emotions than me. But so I thought I could improve on that, and that would be a good occasion to do something where I would be able to show my passions for films a bit more than I would usually do. And so my decision, my way of showing it was to do a series of videos about my favorite Asian films, and I will adopt the same kind of structure as what I did with the recent Asian films to watch, with one video for each country or place of production, let's put it this way. So we start with this video with Hong Kong films, which is a bit like the basic for me, as my specialty in a way is Hong Kong cinema. And then I will keep going with my top 10 favorite Japanese film, my top 10 Korean films, and so on, as many countries as I can do. So that will probably be like 6-7 video like this, and so I hope you will find it interesting. Also about the way I will do in order to have some kind of organization in the video, I've done a ranking, so I will start from 10 until I reach the number 1. But don't take this ranking too seriously. It's really done in order to have some organization there, but in reality all the films I'm going to talk in this video are films which are very close to my heart, which are films which I really love very dearly. And so in reality all of them could be at number 1, number 2, whatever. I mean, the number 10, number 9 could be on number 1 or number 2 at different time of my life. I mean, the next week, when depending on my mood, whatever the reason, it's really not that serious when it comes to the ranking. It's really just in order to have something organized in the video. And of course, also, as I'm going to talk about my favorite Hong Kong film, there is a good chance that you won't discover many hidden gems here. Most of the films I'm going to talk about are fairly known classics, some of them super known. If they are classics, it's for good reasons, and so that's why they will be there. That will be films which I've discovered for many of them at the beginning of my Hong Kong journey. So when I was just starting in this path 20 years ago roughly, and there have been kind of traumatism. I mean, they made a very strong impression on me back then, and so many of those films are considered classics. As I said, if they are classics, it's for a good reason. It's because they are that good. So no surprise that most of the films on this list will be such film will be classic Hong Kong films. So having said that, now I can start the process. So I will start with number 10, number 10, which is The Wild Wild Rose, directed by Wong Tin Lam in 1960. Wong Tin Lam, you may not be very familiar with him, is actually the father of Wong Jing. Wong Jing, I'm sure you are much more aware of him. And Wong Tin Lam was actually a fairly influential, big name director in the 60s. But he's a bit unknown now because he worked mostly for the Cafe, which was the opposite Mandarin studio, which was competing with Shaw Brothers during that time. And while Shaw Brothers, their specialty was exploitation on martial arts film, on trying to recreate some kind of mythical old China. Cathay was on another style. They were more trying to cater to the middle class of Asia, and their films were more modern in tone and settings as well, with thrillers, with musicals, with comedy, but as I said, mostly set in a contemporary world. And so those films have been less well distributed compared to their Shaw Brothers counterparts, and following the kind of death of Cathay at the early 70s, most of their catalog has been forgotten. Fortunately, at the same time as the Shaw Brothers were re-released in the early 2000s thanks to the efforts of Celestials, Cathay did the same, and they released not the entirety of their catalog, but they released many of their films, and their most famous one, and The Wild Wild Rose is one of them. For those of you who don't really know how Wong Tin Lam looks like, you may actually have seen him in many films, because he was a regular of Johnny To's film at the end of the 90s until early 2010, around the time of his death. And so he appeared in many of those films because he was the mentor of Johnny To when Johnny To was at TV during the 70s and 80s. And he was actually a mentor for many influential young filmmakers who did their first works on TV during that time period. Not only Johnny To, Ringo Lam was one of them as well. And so as a filmmaker, as I said, Wong Tin Lam was actually a pretty good director, and Wild Wild Rose is certainly his masterpiece, his very best film. And what is Wild Wild Rose? It's basically a retelling, a remake of Bizet's Carmen, so the very famous opera, which is put in a modern Hong Kong. And we have a musician who is going to fall in love with this kind of modern Carmen, and it's going to be a very tough love relationship between the two of them, and that's going to make for a very interesting musical drama. Let's put it this way. I think that's the right genre we can put it in. The film is beautifully shot. It's a very nice black and white. You can really feel that Wong Tin Lam really paid attention to the direction, to the way he framed, to the camera moves. There is a lot of care which has been put in this film. You can also see some interesting influences from European and American cinema back then. European, of course, just based on the subject matter with the Carmen in the first place, but I'm also thinking about Hollywood noir film of the 1930s, the Maltese Falcon, this kind of films, and there is a bit of this vibe in the film, a bit this kind of film noir thriller aspect, and that really is very nice to see that in a Hong Kong film of the period. I think that's an interesting influence, which is perfectly assumed and reused in an interesting way by Wong Tin Lam. And another reason why the film is so successful, it's the presence of Grace Chang. Grace Chang was one of the big star of Mandarin cinema during the end of the 50s, 60s, but a bit the same scenario as Wong Tin Lam, as she worked mostly in Cathay. She has been a bit forgotten since, but when you are able to watch the film she did for Cathay, and especially The Wild Wild Rose, you see she had a lot of charisma. She's really perfect playing this kind of femme fatale, this kind of black widow in a way, which is going to bring this man to its doom. She is really electric each time she is on the screen, and especially during the musical scenes when she is dancing and singing. She's really bringing something special to the screen. She really takes the light to her, and she brings the film to another level. You have also some very nice musical routine. That's an important aspect from a musical, obviously. And they are really well made, and they use some of the original opera, and they kind of transform them to accommodate the Hong Kong setting of the time, and it works really well. I mean, it blends perfectly, as I said. That's to the credit to Wong Tin Lam, that's to the credit to the scriptwriter, that's the credit to the actors, and especially Grace Chung. So clearly the Wild Wild Rose is, as I said, a masterpiece, one of the best films of Hong Kong during that time. And so if you haven't watched it yet, you should. It's not necessarily that easy to find nowadays, but there had been a VCD and DVD released, as I said, in the early 2000s. That's the way I saw it. So hopefully you can still manage to grab a copy of it and enjoy the electric presence of Grace Chung and the mastery of Wong Tin Lam behind the camera. A mastery which shows that the father was probably better than the son, but some of you would probably disagree with me on that statement. But anyway, so that's my 10, Why I Rose by Wong Tin Lam. For number 9, I was really hesitating between different films. I almost put Duel to the Death by Ching Siu-tung, which is a great film. I also almost put Autumn Moon by Clara Lowe, which is which is a very different animal than Duel to the Death, which I find also very touching and very interesting on many aspects. But at the end, I'm not going to talk about these two films, even if they are great and you should watch them. I'm going to talk about A Song of the Exile, directed by An Hoi, because An Hoi is clearly one of the greatest directors that Hong Kong has produced. And unfortunately, I don't think she has been recognized yet internationally as much as she should have been. In Hong Kong, she is really appreciated by the audience, and especially by the critics. The critics are really in love with An Hoi, and they have been for 30, 40 years now. I mean, consistently, they always praise her work, and she's really recognized as one of the most talented directors which the city has produced, and that's great. But I think internationally there is still a bit of recognition lacking, and that's really too bad. And obviously, I mean, there are many films she has done which are great. I could have put some others than Song of the Exile. I could have put Story of Who Viet, Boat People. I could have also used Summer Snow, Simple Life, so many great films. But I chose to talk about Song of the Exile because I think that's really our most touching film. Song of the Exile is a bit autobiographical for her, because in the film we follow a young Hong Kong student who is studying in the UK and who comes back to Hong Kong in order to be present during the wedding of her sister. And then she will interact with her mother, and she has a very tense, difficult relationship with her mother. And one of the reasons behind this difficult relationship is the fact that her mother is actually a Japanese living in Hong Kong and having married a Chinese man. And so she will join her to Japan, to the place she has been born, and she will discover more about her past, and she will understand all the difficulties she has faced in her life, and in a way she will reconnect with her. And when I say it's biographical, it's autobiographical for An Hoi, it's because she herself studied in the UK, and she herself was born in a international couple with I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly if it's the father or the mother, but one of them is Japanese and the other is Chinese, so exactly the same configuration as in the film. So clearly An Hoi used a lot of these real experiences, of these real feelings and put them in the film, and you can really feel it when you watch it. It feels real, it feels very true, and so that's very touching when you are watching it. And so it's very human because of all these reasons, because of this biographical element. But at the same time, it's also dealing with a lot of interesting subjects which I think are great food for thought about the kind of cultural differences, cultural barrier that there can be, and how difficult it is to be able to pass them and to overcome them and to go further in order to really connect to the humanity of the people, and especially with the case which is being dealt here, being Japanese and Chinese, as you are certainly aware. The history of these two countries, especially during the 20th century, has been extremely complicated, extremely difficult, and so there are the two aspects which are present in the film. There are the human aspects that this kind of history and cultural barrier create, but that's also a way for you to think about the political aspect, the historical aspect, and wonder about how things could improve between these two nations, between these two people. And that's really interesting to think about, I think. The film is also beautifully shot, beautifully acted by Maggie Cheung, who was then at I would say the early stage of her serious acting career, because before that she had mostly played the flower pot, like in Police Story. She was just this young beauty pageant actress who was just there in order to be good looking and brings a bit of youthful energy, but nothing else. But here she's really acting, and you really see the potential, and you really see that she's able to play a character and to bring emotions on the screen for the audience, and that's one of her first great performance, in my opinion. You also have interesting locations, because the film is shot in Hong Kong, in the UK, even if it's quite short for the UK, a bit in Macau as well, which once again is probably a biographical element, because Hanoi had been in Macau for quite a few years during her childhood, and also in Japan, as the family, the mother and the daughter go to Japan. They go to Beppu, which is a small city in the eastern part of Kyushu, which is a hot bath city, thermal city, and which is very nice. So if you have the opportunity, don't hesitate to go to Beppu. It's a very nice city. You can see all the Jigoku thermal source, and that's quite nice for a day trip. I always like to have a bit of this touristic moment in my video, and so if you go there, you can enjoy a nice thermal bath and some touristic area, and you can also check some real locations for Song of the Exile, so 2 in 1. So as you can see, many reasons to watch Song of the Exile, many reasons for Song of the Exile to be on this top 10 on this list of my favorite Hong Kong film. I had the opportunity to watch it not a long time ago, like 1 or 2 years ago, during a retrospective at the Hong Kong Art Center, and we had the luck to have also a bit of a small short Q&A with Hanoi talking about the film. So that was a very pleasant experience. That's the benefit of living in Hong Kong. There are still some, despite the tense political situation we are in. But yeah, go for it. Go for Hanoi's filmography in general. You should watch all her films, but take a special moment to watch Song of the Exile, which in my opinion, as I said, is her very best film. In number 8, we have a completely different animal. It's AV, directed by Edmond Pang in 2005. Edmond Pang is a director I really appreciate. I really like him a lot. I think he's one of the last active director in Hong Kong nowadays who is able to keep this kind of Hong Kong spirit, Hong Kong energy, this a bit corrosive sense of humor. He has also always a great concept for his films, always amazing starting point, which always make you want to watch more and to be curious about what he's going to propose. And once again, a bit like An Hoi, he has done many very good films. I especially recommend you his Puff or Puff Buff trilogy with Love in the Puff, if I remember correctly. I hope I'm not mixing between the Puff and the Buff, which is a very nice romantic comedy with this Hong Kong spirit I was talking about. But if I have to choose only one of his filmography, that will be this AV, which is a fairly small production. You can see it was made as a small budget, but I really love the concept. And so the concept is a group of Hong Kong students, a bit of losers, a bit guys who like to play around, to fool around, and who are not very serious about their life. And they are into porn, and maybe you are not aware of that. But in Hong Kong, porn is illegal, meaning you cannot produce porn. You cannot have porn being made here, or at least being released here. But you can actually import porn from everywhere else. And the number one Asian producer of porn in the world is Japan. So you can find a lot of Japanese porn in Hong Kong if you are interested in that. And so those young guys obviously are interested into these kind of things, and they are especially attracted by one of the AV star, AV standing for adult video. And in order to fulfill their fantasy of making love to her, they decide to create a fake shooting, so to shoot a fake porn film so that they would be the actors and so that they can have sex with her. So that's the concept of the film, and I find it great. I mean, I love this concept. I find it very hilarious. Just the idea is already very funny, and the rest of the film is a bit disjointed, but it has this energy, it has this spontaneity, it has this kind of corrosive humor, which is very typical of Hong Kong, and that makes it for extremely fun viewings, and also a bit of sentimental time, sentimental scenes there and there, which is typical of the Hong Kong cinema. We love this kind of a change of tone, sometimes a bit abrupt, but that was in a way the specialty of Hong Kong cinema during its golden age, and Edmond Pong is able to deal with it, and is able to use that to his advantage and for the best of the film. There are many great scenes, and I'm especially thinking about the time where they meet this kind of a beggar, a rapper beggar, played by Jim Chim. It's a great scene. So there are a lot of things that I like in AV. It's a movie which is very spontaneous, which encapsulates Hong Kong spirit on many ways, and so I really recommend it to you if you haven't seen it yet. I hope Edmond Pong will keep doing great Hong Kong film. It's not a given, as it seems from what I heard that he has moved to Canada following our dear national security law. I haven't been able to have it confirmed yet. I would understand why he would do it, but if that's the case, that's a bit sad for Hong Kong cinema and Hong Kong film industry to lose such a great talent. But anyway, he has done many films, and hopefully he will continue doing many great films wherever he is. And AV is, in my opinion, once again one of his best. So once again, also check it out if you haven't seen it yet. You will. If you like Hong Kong, if you love Hong Kong, you will love AV. At number 7, we have From the Queen to the Chief Executive, directed by Hermanio. Hermanio, it's one of those Stakhanovist Hong Kong film director, people who have been able to to direct like 3, 4, 5 films a year when it was during its golden age, or even during some of its dark time. That was one of the characteristics of Hermanio. He was able to still produce and direct many films during the dark age, and he has been able also to deal with many different genres, that may it be horror, may it be comedy, may it be romance, may it be action. He has really done all kind of films, and he has done it with a real talent. I mean, he's a real smart guy. He has a real talent when it comes to filmmaking, and it's always a pleasure to see him behind the camera. And that was not a given that he would be able to extend his directing skill to such a wide array of genre, because during the early 90s he became kind of famous and a cult director thanks to his category 3 films, things like Untold Story or Ebola Syndrome, which are great category 3 films. But for a while he was indeed kind of typecast as this kind of category 3 director, and he tried to escape from this niche, from this classification, which may have restrained him. I mean, it kind of has been the case for some other category 3 directors, and he managed to escape from this categorization himself, and so he was able to continue his career with great success. And at the end of the 90s, early 2000, until sometime at the end of the 2000, he had a kind of serious film streak. I mean by that he was able to deal with films which were more social, more political in some ways. That was, for example, the film he did about prostitution in Hong Kong, like Whispers and Moans, and True Women for Sales, which are great films. And with the same scriptwriter as those two films, he also did From the Queen to the Chief Executive. And From the Queen to the Chief Executive was kind of the first of this serious film streak that he would do. And so that was kind of a new thing. That was a bit like when Takashi Miike stopped doing some insane action Yakuza film, and he started to deal with some more serious films like Bird People from China. And so it's a bit the same phenomenon which happened with Hermanio when he did From the Queen to the Chief Executive. So what is From the Queen to the Chief Executive? It deals with a specificity of the British judicial system, which is there is a specific penalty under some specific conditions as well, but I'm no specialist about that, so I won't go into details. But so when these specific conditions are fulfilled, you can be condemned to some jail time, but with no precise length for it. So it's indefinite until the Queen decides that it's over, and you can finish and you can be released from the jail. So it's obviously something a bit from the medieval time, which is still survived, but is not much used anymore. And it was used in one specific case in Hong Kong being back then a British colony, for a murder case which had been a big thing in Hong Kong. I can't remember exactly if it was the end of the 70s or early 80s. That was the murder of a couple of a Western couple, some young teenager Westerners who were killed by a group of Hong Kong young guys. And so they were convicted, they were condemned, but there was at least one of them who was under 18, and so that fulfilled some of the conditions I was talking about, and so he was found guilty of the murder but put under this Queen appreciation. So he was put in jail, but there was no clear term for his jail time. And so when the handover happened in 1997, the question arose for his case, what would happen to him? Would he have to stay in prison forever? Could he be just released like that? And so there were a lot of questions about that. first a set of questions, as I said, but there was also the fact that as the guy had been guilty of a murder, there was not really an interest either from the different governments or just the general public about his case, and so that was left to some activists who try to have this case solved. So that's a real story which happened in Hong Kong after the handover, and so that is the subject of the film. And the scriptwriter who is involved in From the Queen to the Chief Executive, Yishan Yang, who was later involved with Truman for Sales on Whispers and Moans, had been involved with that case. She had followed that case back then, and so she transformed it into a script under the guidance of Hermanio. And that makes for a very, very interesting film, which deals with many interesting issues, like the question of sovereignty, what happens when one government is followed by another, which have very different judicial traditions, what happened about the concept of penalty. I think that's something which is extremely important, the concept of penalty, and which is not often discussed. Whatever the system there is in the world, is a penalty made to punish someone, or is it made to make someone better so that he can get back into society and contribute to society? That's the kind of serious issues which are not often discussed. As I said, whatever society you are living in, I'm pretty sure there are not these kind of debates going on, and that's really a shame. And From the Queen to the Chief Executive gives you some food for thought about this kind of issue and makes you wonder, make you think about that, and that's, I think, a very positive thing. And at the same time, there is also a real human drama there, with characters which you can kind of relate in a way, which you can understand. You can understand what kind of activism is going on, and why they are doing that, and it's very human, whatever way you take it. And it's not black and white either. The activists are working so that this murderer can be treated more humanly, even if he is indeed guilty of the murder. And that's something which I think is very interesting, and which to the benefit of the film, that it doesn't try to make it either too dramatic, either too melodramatic. It's not trying to get you to cry for the guy who is in jail. It really shows that he was part of a brutal murder. But at the same time, it shows that it's important to treat others humanly, and that they can evolve, that there are some real questions about, as I said, penalties and things like this. And so it's a movie which touches you in the heart, but which also stimulates your brain about all these kind of serious political, social issues. And so that makes for a great film to watch. Unfortunately, From the Queen to the Chief Executive, while it had a good reputation, while it had some very good reviews when it was released back then in 2001, if I remember correctly, it has since been a bit forgotten, and I don't think there have been any release since the DVD back then, so early 2000. So you may have to struggle a bit, you may have to work out a bit in order to find the movie, but believe me, it's really worth the trouble. From the Queen to the Chief Executive is a great film, thanks to Hermanio and all the people who have been involved in its making. At number 6, of course, I have a Wong Kar-wai film. When you talk about Hong Kong cinema, it's unavoidable. You must talk at some point about Wong Kar-wai. And I've chosen Chungking Express. I could have chosen films such as The Grandmaster or In the Mood for Love, which you could argue they are even biggest artistic achievement. But I especially like the early stage of Wong Kar-wai's career as a director. Films like As Tears Go By, films like Days of Being Wild and of course Chungking Express. And why do I like those films even better in a way than In the Mood for Love or The Grandmaster? It's because there is a lot of sincerity and spontaneity in this film, and that's something I really appreciate. What I really appreciate the most in Chungking Express is the energy that there is. You really feel the energy of Hong Kong, the kind of energy I felt the very first time I arrived in Hong Kong in 2002. This energy which is specific to Hong Kong in some degree, even if there are similar energies in other big cities all over the world, but there is some kind of unique energy which is specific to Hong Kong, and that's something which I think Wong Kar-wai really managed to catch in Chungking Express. At the same time, you also have a great cast as usual with Wong Kar-wai, of course Brigitte Lin, Takeshi Kaneshiro, Tony Leung Chiu-wai, Fei Wong, and I especially liked personally Valerie Cho, who is kind of forgotten nowadays, but she really made a strong impression on me, on the teenage me when I watched it quite a few years ago, and I think she has a lot of she had a lot of potential, and she managed to be in some very good films. Actually, she was also in The Blade, but still she never really became a major star, and that's really a shame. But she's great in Chungking Express, and at the same time as there is this energy in the film, there is also some interesting topics, some interesting subject with the difficulty to communicate, with the difficulty to show emotions to others, which is one of the main subjects of Wong Kar-wai's filmography. But I think it's expressed in a quite playful, sincere way in Chungking Express, at least much more than it would be expressed sometimes in later stage, like with Fallen Angels, for example, or 2046. There is really a sincerity and energy and classical Wong Kar-wai stylistic and thematic ID concept here, which makes it a very exhilarating film to watch. So of course, if you are a Hong Kong film fan, you should check all these films as a director. They are all interesting to some extent. They all have something to offer. But as far as I'm concerned, emotionally, I think Chungking Express is the film of Wong Kar-wai which has touched me the most. So it has to be on this 10 favorite Hong Kong films. Number 5, I have God of Cookery, directed by Lee Lik-chi and Stephen Chow. I'm a big fan of Stephen Chow. I think it's pretty obvious if you have been following the marathon, the Stephen Chow marathon I've been doing. When I'm shooting this video, I actually haven't recorded yet the third part of my Stephen Chow retrospective. So the movie I'm going to talk about, God of Cookery, is a movie I haven't yet talk about, so I will try to make it different between the retrospective and between this video. But God of Cookery I especially like for several reasons. First, because it's one of the very first Stephen Chow film I have ever seen, and so that of course that left a strong impression on me, because when I discovered it, that was around the time Shaolin Soccer was being released. That was the time for most of the Western film fans when we discovered Stephen Chow, and especially when it came to Stephen Chow in France. There was back then a few critics who were trying to really highlight Hong Kong films. They did a great job when it comes to showing the genius that is John Woo, that is Choi Ark, that is those kind of filmmakers. But they had a strong reservation when it came to Stephen Chow. And so when I discovered it, I wasn't sure if it was going to be good. And so as I had fairly low expectations, when I saw God of Cookery, I was really blown away, because I thought, my God, this guy is a genius of comedy. It's so funny. And so that made a very strong impression on me, and that's what I said in my original first video of the retrospective, that you should check Stephen Chow. Don't be afraid that there will be some kind of cultural barrier. Even if there are sometimes some cultural barrier, you will still be able to pass over them and have a great time and have many laughs. And I did, certainly, when I watched God of Cookery. I think it really has this kind of manga, absurd, no sense comedy style, which I really enjoy personally. So it was a real blast to discover Stephen Chow in the film. And I also like the fact that he plays kind of a bad guy at the beginning of the film. I really enjoy when he's playing this kind of sleazy, mean characters. I think he's really great at that, maybe because he's actually closer to that in real life. but that makes for very good laughs when he's starting to scold poor people around him, when he's being such an asshole. I think he's doing it with a real talent. And the third reason for which I have a huge love for God of Cookery, it's also the choice of the main topic, I mean the food. I think that's one of the best films when it comes to food, because it managed to make its recipe, to make its preparation of food exciting and also appetizing. I mean, after watching the film, you will really be hungry and you will want to eat one of the delicious food that Hong Kong is able to provide. And that's not something which is necessarily that well handled. I'm thinking here, for example, of the Chinese Feast, Choyak's Chinese Feast, which is not a bad comedy by itself, which is quite entertaining and which has some of the Choyak's maestria, Choyak's genius, but it doesn't manage to make. First, it's a lesser comedy, I think, compared to God of Cookery. I think God of Cookery is more funny because of this specific Stephen Chow style compared to the more cinematic, slapstick style of Choyak in the Chinese Feast. And also because in the Chinese Feast, Choyak chooses to highlight some very high cuisine dish, very exotic dish, which you will probably never eat in your life, while in the case of Stephen Chow, he managed to be much more grounded, much more real, and so you can relate much more compared to Choyak's version. And so that's another aspect which I like, the grounded aspect when he goes to Mongkok, when he discovers back the cooking, the kind of everyday life food. That's something I'm more able to relate compared to the very high cuisine that Choyak proposes in the Chinese Feast. And so that's the combination of all that. The Stephen Chow is at the best of his comedy style back then. When he did God of Cookery, he was really at the top of his comedic art. The fact that he plays a bad guy, the fact that he deals with cooking, that he deals with food, all these reasons gets together on the more personal reason that it is one of the very few, one of the very first Stephen Chow film I discovered. So all this combined for me to have God of Cookery at the very top of my favorite Hong Kong films. On number 4, I've put a Legendary Weapon of China, directed by Lau Kar-leung. Of course, there had to be a Lau Kar-leung film on this list because Lau Kar-leung is the greatest kung fu director. There is really no debate, I think. There are, of course, many other great action directors, many great kung fu filmmakers such as Sammo Hung, Jackie Chan, Yuen Woo-ping. I mean, all those people are great by themselves. They really deserve a lot of credit. They are amazing. But on the top of the mountain, number 1 is Lau Kar-leung. He really did the very best kung fu films during this incredible time period, I would say from 1977 until 1984. So a span of 7 years during which he did kung fu films after kung fu films, masterpiece after masterpiece. And that's really insane when you think about it, that he was able to keep such a quality of work, such a consistency for 7 years. That's really amazing. And that's thanks to his genius, of course, and also thanks to the support he had from the Shaw Brothers back then. So I could have listed a lot of films. I could have talked about Mad Monkey Kung Fu, Shaolin Mantis, Heroes of the East, My Young Auntie, Lady is the Boss, which I also enjoy a lot. But I chose to talk about Legendary Weapon of China. And there are two main reasons for that. First, I really like the time period during which the film is supposed to be, which is slightly before the beginning of the Boxer Rebellion. For those of you who are not very aware of Chinese history, so the Boxer Rebellion started at the very end of the 19th century, early 20th century, with a rebellion against the Qing dynasty. There were actually many different reasons which explain this revolt against the Qing dynasty, but I won't go into detail there because that's not the subject. But just there was a revolt against the Qing dynasty, and the Qing dynasty managed to redirect it against the colonial powers, and that led to the siege of the foreign legations in Beijing. And unfortunately, after it was first, that led to many people dying. That's always a problem. And that led also to Western and Japanese intervention, which didn't really make the situation of China easier. And so this period I find interesting. And one of the main characteristics of the Boxer was that they were into martial arts, and they believed, at least a part of them, into the more fantastical aspect of martial arts, the kind of superpower it could give to people, like being able to survive after being shot by a gun, these kind of things, this kind of superpower. And Lau Kar-leung is someone who is always promoting Kung Fu, and who is always promoting a philosophy of Kung Fu and a reality of Kung Fu. Is not trying to pretend that it's going to give you superpower. On the contrary, he will show, like in the 36th chamber of Shaolin, that you have to work your ass off all your life in order to make it work, and in order to be a better human being. And so by choosing to set the action of Legendary Weapon of China in that time period, it's a way for him to condemn this kind of superstition, this kind of beliefs, and brings back Kung Fu into a more grounded, a more realistic environment, which can still apply nowadays, because of course we still have many people using martial arts in order to promote some dubious thinking, which have some kind of almost a magical power. And so that's something which is interesting to see here, the lesson which Lau Kar-leung is providing on the fact that you see this environment, a pre-Boxer Rebellion time. So that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy Legendary Weapon of China. And the second reason is that while I love to see a Lau Kar-leung film, while I love to have him behind the camera as a director and as a choreographer, I also especially enjoy to see Lau Kar-leung in front of the camera. I like to see him perform and to show his Kung Fu skills. So as soon as he is on camera, I think he really takes the light to him, and he really shines. He's really able to show an higher degree of mastery than most of his partner, than most of the other performers, even if most of the time most of them are great martial artists or acrobats themselves. But when Lau Kar-leung is on the screen, there is something special, and that's especially interesting in Legendary Weapon of China, because the big final of the film is a fight between Lau Kar-leung and his brother Lau Kar-wing, a fight during which they will use all the classical weapon of traditional kung fu, and so that's an incredible showcase. You cannot dream a better opponent for Lo Kar Leung than his brother Lo Kar Wing, who is almost as gifted as his older brother when it comes to traditional Hong Kong kung fu, and so that makes for an amazing piece of kung fu fight, of kung fu choreography. It's just sublime, divine. Puts the adjective you want. It's just amazing, and so that's why at the end of the day I chose to have Legendary Weapon of China in this incredible filmography of Lo Kar Leung. That's one of the movies I really enjoy the most, and so that's why it is so high on this list. At number 3, I've put The Young Master, directed by Jackie Chan. So it's a bit like Lo Kar Leung. I mean, I had to have a Jackie Chan film, and I was really hesitating with Dragon Forever, because that was also an opportunity for me to put Sammo on the list. But I have to make some choices, and at the end of the day I chose The Young Master. Why did I choose The Young Master? First, because it's a movie which is at the crossroad when it comes to kung fu genre. It's a movie which is one foot in the traditional classical kung fu style, which means with long takes, with a lot of different moves being performed on this kind of rhythm, which is a bit automatic, which is a bit repetitive, with this this kind of rhythm, which was really the way of doing things at the end of the 70s in Hong Kong kung fu cinema. But at the same time, The Young Master opens the door to another style, which would be the dominant style of action when it comes to fist fight in Hong Kong during the 80s, with an editing which is much faster, much crisper, much more aggressive in a way, and choreography which are also shorter compared to what was the norm in the end of the 70s in films like Drunken Master or Snake in the Eagle Shadow, Knockabout Warriors 2, all these kind of films. And so I find it fascinating, because you see in the same film this change of style, and they are the most obvious when it comes to Jackie's fight with Fan Mengsheng, the father of Fan Siu Wong, the Fan fight, which is in this kind of old school traditional kung fu style with long takes, and which is beautiful. It's a great fight. It's really a pleasure to watch. But then a bit later in the film you will have the moment where things are changing, which is when Wong Ying-sik, the main bad guy, is being rescued by his 3 goons, and when he finally has the possibility to showcase his action style, then suddenly the editing becomes much more aggressive. Suddenly the rhythm of the choreography is extremely fast. It's there is an emphasis on the hits, on the painfulness of the hits. There is an emphasis on the impact, and so that's really the beginning of this trend of action style in Hong Kong cinema, an action style which I really enjoy, I really love. I think I'm not sure it has ever been topped. I think it may have been the most exciting ever that Hong Kong has done when it comes to action, even if there have been some great stuff after. That's probably the action style I enjoy the most. And so to see this transition in one movie is really something I enjoy a lot. And at the same time, the movie was very influential for me because I was blown away by the demonstration, by the performance of Wong Ying-sik, the main bad guy, Wong Ying-sik, who is an Hapkido master. And so Hapkido, not Aikido, which is a Korean martial arts, so a mix of taekwondo when it comes to the kicks, and a mix of jiu-jitsu when it comes to the different locks. And that makes for a very impressive showcase during the final of the film, when he's punishing Jackie Chan for like 10 to 15 minutes. And the first time I saw that, I was really amazed. I thought, wow, this guy is incredible. And I've watched this final scene many times since, and each time I am blown away by the mastery, by the perfection of his moves. And that was one of the motivation for me to learn martial arts. So there are people who saw Bruce Lee and wanted to become a new Bruce Lee. There were some people who saw Jean-Claude Van Damme and they started to train like him. There are people nowadays who saw Scott Adkins as Yuri Boyka and they want to be like this, or Donnie Yen as Ip Man. And so they go for martial arts because they want to be like this. In my case, the one I wanted to emulate is actually Wong Ying-sik. Wong Ying-sik is my martial art god in a way. And luckily for me, where I was living back then, there was no Aikido club, so I had to go for a Taekwondo club instead. But anyway, that's how I got into martial arts. That's because of this amazing showcase by Wong Ying-sik that I started going into martial arts, and in a way that has kind of led my life in another direction that I originally thought it would be, and that has led me to be there now doing this kind of video, living in Hong Kong and talking about Hong Kong cinema. So I owe a great deal to the young master, and so that's why at the end of the day, when it comes to Jackie Chan's film, I have to choose the young master, even if Project A, even if Police Story, even if Dragon Forever are amazing film as well, and they could have been on this list. But anyway, a choice had to be made, and so I followed my heart and I chose the young master. Position number 2, I have Peking Opera Blues, directed by Choi Ark. Same as Lau Kar-leung, same as Jackie Chan, I mean, same as Wong Kar-wai. There must be a Choi Ark film in my favorite Hong Kong films, at least because I've spent like 3 years doing a biography of him, so I must have one of his films on this list. It's a bit like all the other filmmakers I've been talking about before. There are many films I could have chosen, but I chose Peking Opera Blues, and for a very similar reason as Wong Kar-wai. While there are many great films in Choi Ark's filmography, and one could argue that he did his very best work during the early 90s, in the first half of the 90s, with Once Upon a Time in China, with Green Snake, with The Lovers, with The Blade, which are all masterpieces, which are all great films. Still, I have a special liking for the Choi Ark of the 80s, when he was very aggressive, when he was very imaginative, when he was very creative, when he was very hard on his team also, and he was very hard on himself. That made for films which were all over the place, which were quite messy many times, but I really enjoyed them. I think most of the film he did during that time as a director or as a producer are amazing. I really love to rewatch them, and so I choose Peking Opera Blues because I think it's the most emblematic of this time period of his career, and a bit for the same reason as Chungking Express when it came to Wong Kar-wai, because there is this energy, this vibe, this freedom, which is something which explains why I fell in love with Hong Kong cinema. It's really this energy, this freedom, this capacity to deal with many different genres, to go from an exciting action scene and then a very touching moment with the characters, then a stupid comedy, then something a bit more serious when it comes to the political issues at hand. And there is all that in Peking Opera Blues, all that with the gorgeous artistic direction, a gorgeous cinematography, amazing soundtrack by James Wong, and some extremely charismatic actors. Of course, the three main actresses are just beautiful in every ways, and that makes for a film which is on another planet when it comes to the quality. I mean, everything is at the right place, everything is handled perfectly by Choi Ark. He's able to move from one genre, one side of the story, one element with such fluidity. It's really amazing that he's able to do that so well at this stage of his career. And so, yeah, a lot of energy, a lot of passion at the same time. You will laugh when you watch it. You will wonder about the political elements which are in the film. You will be amazed by the beauty of the different actors, and not only the ladies. Of course, the ladies are great, but also you have Mark Cheng, who was probably never better than that in all his career. It's really a beautiful film on so many levels. It's a movie I'm really in love with. But strangely enough, it's not one of Choi Ark's most famous. I think when it comes to Choi Ark's career, there are much more discussions around Once Upon a Time in China, around the Swordsman trilogy, these kind of films, which once again they are really great as well. But I really have a deep love for Peking Opera Blues, for this energy, for the creativity. I think he was at his best back then. He was really able to juggle with many different styles, and for maximum pleasure as an audience. It's a masterpiece. Obviously, it's a great film, and if you haven't watched it yet, of course, as it's the case for all the film I'm talking about, you should go for it. You should look for it. You won't be disappointed. And at the very top position, I have A Better Tomorrow by John Woo. Well, same as the other. I mean, I had no choice. I had to have a John Woo film in this list, in this favorite Hong Kong films. And similarly as The Young Master, I chose A Better Tomorrow, not necessarily because that's the best John Woo film. I think there is a stronger argument to be made that The Killer is an even better film than A Better Tomorrow. But I choose to have A Better Tomorrow at the number one position in this video because I find A Better Tomorrow more touching. A Better Tomorrow, there is a real sincerity. I mean, of course there is sincerity in The Killer as well, but you can feel that in A Better Tomorrow, John Woo has really put all his guts, all his heart in the film. He really wants to make a point. He really wants to develop some strong values, strong characters, and he does it with a lot of guts, a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and you can really feel it when you watch the film. And at the same time, in a similar way as The Young Master, where there is a change of guard, a change, an evolution of action style in Hong Kong cinema. It's the same with A Better Tomorrow. You can see that there is something happening there with the John Woo style of action, which is starting to appear for the very first time. There were some glimpses, of course, in Last Hurrah for Chivalry, or for the other one he did with Lam Ching Ying in Thailand. But that's really in A Better Tomorrow, that all the ingredients are at the right place, and you have the first taste of John Woo's genius of action with the very famous Taiwanese restaurant gunfight. And at the same time, there are some other action scenes where it's not that well mastered, where it's not completely in place. So the same way as The Young Master, you have these two different action styles which are in the same film, and so that makes for for a very fascinating viewing, for a very fascinating watch when you discover A Better Tomorrow. And A Better Tomorrow is a film I often come back to because there are always new things to discover. There are always some aspects which you will appreciate more depending on what has happened in your life or what has happened in your environment around you. I'm thinking, for example, of some of the talk about Hong Kong. I think they can be seen in another light nowadays with the current situation Hong Kong is experiencing. I think that makes it even more powerful, and so that's a movie which talked to me on many different levels, and in a similar way as The Young Master. While The Young Master pushed me in a direction with the martial arts interest, which led me in some ways to change my life. It's a similar thing which happened with A Better Tomorrow. A Better Tomorrow was very influential in my love of Hong Kong cinema. That really made me open my eyes about Hong Kong cinema, and that made me want to discover more. I really felt very deeply about the friendship values that John Woo was putting forward in the film. And to this day, I think they are still very inspirational. They really make you want to be like them, really want to become a better human person, to be better for the people around you. So there are a lot of things to take from A Better Tomorrow on many different levels, just as an audience to enjoy a good show, but at the same time some values which can talk to your heart, some love about different aspects, being Hong Kong, being other elements which can talk to you and which can relate to you and which can inspire you once again in order to become a better person. And so A Better Tomorrow is really the apex, one of the very best film as far as I'm concerned, because of all the reasons I've just detailed. It's a marvelous film, a film I'm in love with. I've been in love with for more than 20 years, and so of course it has to be at the very top of this video of my favorite Hong Kong film. So that's the end for this 10 favorite Hong Kong film. I hope you have found it interesting. I hope you have been able to feel the passion and the love I have for all the great films I've talked about. If you haven't seen some of them, please do so. It's really worth the effort. They are all extremely interesting films, and they are really worth at least one watch. I will continue to transmit my passion for Asian films with this series of favorite films from the different parts of Asia. So I will see you very soon on the House of Asian Cinema. Until then, take care.